Dignitaries, guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our spotlight speaker of this session, Mr. Jayant Sinha. Mr. Sinha, a member of Parliament, India, is the chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance. He has held portfolios like Minister of State for Finance and Minister of State for Civil Aviation in the Government of India. He had been a member of the Public Accounts Committee for 2019-20. And in his previous avatar, prior to being a politician, he has been an investment fund manager and a management consultant. His interests and proclivities in environment and climate change have been evident from his various recent initiatives and writings on green transition and on overall climate action. So with that, sir, it's over to you. I welcome you to take over the dais.
Thank you very much, Nilanjan, and a very good afternoon to all the dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the media who are present here. We got a very good segue into all the issues related with climate change and climate finance from our G20 Sherpa, Shri Amitabh Kantji. And in particular, what Shri Kant suggested and highlighted is that today we are dealing with not just one, but many, many crises. So this is an age of polycrisis, as many people have suggested and proposed. So this is an age of many different crises. And in this age, for us to get support for accelerated action on climate is actually very, very difficult. And that's why I thought it would be very opportune to actually play for you this scene from this movie, which many of you might have seen. So let me just play the scene. Ritika, can you just cue that? I just have to press the cue button. Okay, here we go.
There's a comet headed directly towards Earth. Do you know how many the world is ending meetings we've had over the last 2 years?
Drought, famine.
Hole in the ozone is so boring.
So I just thought this was a very good scene to start discussions on climate action, because what you see from this movie called Don't Look Up is that the world is jaded. The world is jaded. We are living in an age of polycrisis. Everything seems to be a crisis. We have a food crisis. We have an energy crisis. We have a climate crisis. We have a global trade order is fracturing crisis. Do we really have the time and the attention in this world of crises to focus on climate action? Ladies and gentlemen, I will argue that we have no choice. We have no choice. We cannot be in a situation where everybody is looking down on their smartphones and trying to browse the web and get their Instagram feed and their Facebook feed. We've got to look up, and we've got to look at this presentation as well. Because climate action really incorporates and really embodies so many of these different crises we are facing, whether it's energy, whether it's food, whether it is what's happening geopolitically. And so it's very, very important, I think, particularly for the G20, and exactly as Srikanth said, for all of you who are the brain trust for the G20, to really engage with this set of issues associated with climate and to start to guide us as policymakers on what you think is the right way to move forward on climate action. And with that, I just want to introduce you all to a set of ideas that we've been working on, which is around the Global Climate Alliance for Accelerated Climate Action. We've been very fortunate and privileged to have many members of the G20 through their various different research institutes and think tanks working on this and collaborating on this. We've been fortunate to have folks from MIT, from Tufts, from the London School of Economics, from DIW, from ORF, from WRI, the World Resources Institute, many folks, Brookings, all of these collaborating to put together this set of ideas. And that's what we want to present to you. I'll go through a few slides just to highlight what these ideas are about. And then we will have for you the actual book that we put together on this set of ideas, which we will be launching as soon as I finish. But let me just show you a few slides to highlight what we mean by a Global Climate Alliance for Accelerated Climate Action. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that net zero is net positive. We are going to go through this in much more detail through some of the roundtable discussions we've already had. We will continue to have in the T20. There's much more detail on this in the book that we will be releasing. But folks, net zero is net positive. It's a win for the planet, obviously, as we decarbonize, but it's a win for the global south and a win for the global north if we can get off the global warming trajectory that we are on right now, which according to the UNEP is going to take us to 2.8 degrees centigrade of global warming by 2100. So if we have a chance of getting to 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade, we have to take action. And if we take action, it's a win-win-win. Now, to achieve that, particularly for the global south, because most of the global north is already legally committed to net zero. The EU, of course, has Fit for 55. The UK, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, all have passed laws committing them to net zero by 2050. Japan has done the same thing. We have to invest massively to make it happen. What the analyses are telling us is that in India, for example, when the private sector is investing $65 billion a year, for us to get on a decarbonization pathway that gets us to net zero by 2070, we have to double private sector capex. We have to increase private sector capex by $50 to $100 billion to be on a decarbonization pathway. That's what India requires. It's exactly similar for Brazil, for Indonesia, for Nigeria, South Africa, and for other global south countries. Now, if we have to double private sector capex in India to be on a net zero pathway, we need a lot of help and support from the multilateral development banks, from the development finance institutions, from the global north. Sadly, leave aside the $100 billion that Shrikant spoke about earlier today. What we are seeing the MDBs do is to actually fail in this very, very important priority, if not the most important priority for them. And the numbers right now, self-reported, these are the numbers coming from their own reporting on climate finance. You can see, do not get anywhere close to the trillions of dollars that are required for the global south for decarbonization. One of our colleagues, Shri Amar Bhattacharya ji, has run the numbers on this, and his estimates are that the global south requires $2 to $2.5 trillion a year for mitigation, just to get to net zero. I'm not even talking about adaptation and resilience. Just for mitigation requires $2 to $2.5 trillion a year. This is the global south ex-China, not including China. So the scale of the requirement for climate finance is extraordinary. And unfortunately, the global financial system, and there's plenty of capital in the global financial system, particularly in the global north, is not able to bridge the gap between the capital that's available in the global north and the financing requirements in the global south. And there are a number of gaps here, risks such as currency risks, such as policy risks, that mean that the cost of capital for a steel company in Brazil, for a renewables company in India, the cost of capital is punitively high, particularly when we look at equity cost of capital. And therefore, we are not able to close the gap, and we are not able to get the trillions of dollars that are required for the global south to move for climate financing. So what we are proposing is a global climate alliance. I'm not going to go into details on this slide because this is all laid out in the book in some detail. But what we are suggesting is that we build on the Paris Agreement, that we have two groups of countries, a group A, which need not necessarily sign up for net zero by 2050. But then there is a group B, and this group B is largely the OECD countries, many of which have already signed up for net zero by 2050. There may be some global south countries that will be in group B as well. But in general, the group B countries have to support the group A countries in decarbonization. There will have to be financing and technology flows so that the group A countries like, for example, India, can actually get on the net zero pathway. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And what that really means is that we have to transform the climate financing system, that we have to plug the gaps that I spoke about earlier. We need to have the MDBs and the DFIs really playing a vital role in doing so. for dealing with the risks that are there when you invest in the Global South. We need green investment agencies in the Global South. We need alignment of standards. We need alignment of policies. And we need sufficient financing from the Global North to pull this off. Otherwise, the trillions of dollars are not going to flow, and this whole decarbonization net zero pathway cannot be achieved by the Global South. So we are talking about a variety of different blended capital instruments that collectively can unlock the trillions of dollars of capital flows that are required. And I want to emphasize that the trillions of dollars are not going to come from Global North budgets. They cannot. No one is expecting that. They have to come from the private sector. But there is a very important role for public sector capital here, and that is to create the blended finance instruments that can unlock these private sector flows, as well as to provide support for some important grant-based programs such as for loss and damage and for the JETP programs that are underway. So there is a portfolio of blended finance instruments that need to be unlocked, and once we unlock them, then we can make this happen. So the practical way of moving forward on this is through a sector-by-sector approach. We have to take various different sectors, whether it's steel, whether it's cement, whether it's energy, whether it's the financial system. We have to put it into the G20 process and work it through sector by sector to make this happen. The best way to implement this is through working groups in these different sectors, which is what we are proposing happens through the B20 process. And so I'll conclude by another scene from a movie. And some of you may recognize this, but it really articulates, ladies and gentlemen, it really articulates what the Global South is asking the Global North. So let me play the scene.
Show me the money.
Does that make you feel good just to say that? Say it with me one time, Jerry.
Show you the money.
Oh, no, you can do better than that, Jerry. I want you to say it with meaning, brother. Hey, I got Bob Sugar on the other line. I better hear you say it.
Yeah, no. Show you the money.
Not show you. Show me the money.
Show me the money.
Yeah. Louder.
Show me the money.
That's it, brother, but you got to yell that shit.
Show me the money.
I need to feel you, Jerry.
Show me the money.
Jerry, you better yell. Show me the money.
So to just end on a half joking mode, the fact is that it is about show me the money. It is about show me the money. What the UN modeling is showing us is that if you move forward over the next few decades, the vast majority of global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, 70% or more are going to come from the Global South, because the Global North is already committed to net zero and they have the capital and the technology to get there. Japan will get there, the UK will get there, the EU will get there. But it is India and Nigeria and Bangladesh and Brazil and Indonesia. It will be very difficult for us to unlock the financing, to unlock the technology, to be able to get there without the support of the Global North. And so I'll once again end as a fervent plea from the Global South: show us the money. That's how we can make it happen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now I would request all the members that have worked on putting together this book to just come up with me. We'll release and launch this book and, of course, give it to all of you as well. Thank you so much. Could my colleagues please come up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. You really did make a very impassioned case for climate finance. We will now take a short break and we request you to assemble at 3:10 back in this room for the next plenary. Tea and coffee is outside.